Hello and welcome to the Mobile Accessible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Mobile Accessible Games is a group that's dedicated to all things about mobile accessible gaming, and through our interview series, we interview game developers, accessibility advocates, and accessibility influencers. And this week, we are bringing back someone who's been on the interview series before and has had some recent successes in the awards season, and his name is Zach Tidwell. He's the creator of Zanagrams. So, Zach, welcome back.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm excited to be back.
So Zach, for those who either aren't in the Mobile Accessible Games group, and you should be, so go to Facebook and join the Mobile Accessible Games group. You can see Zach quite a bit there commenting, and who maybe did not see my previous interview with Zach, which you should go back and watch that as well. Great interview. But why don't you tell people a little bit, for the new people, a little bit, who you are? Who is Zach Tidwell?
Should I go way back into the weeds like the first time, or just short?
Well, let's keep it to gaming. Who's Zach Tidwell, the gamer? Yeah.
I'm Zach Tidwell. I'm 28, and I taught myself how to code after losing my sight. My first game, Zanagrams, came out on the App Store in July of 2023, and then it just won Game of the Year on Aaron's group, Mobile Accessible Games, and on the Apple Viz website. And then Aaron actually had an article posted about it on Pocket Gamer, which is a mainstream news source for mobile gaming. So it was really big, and it's kind of on a high right now. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, so Zach, I think I talked about this in our last interview. Like, I can't remember exactly when or why you and I started talking, but we started talking right near the beginning of when you started to teach yourself how to code, where maybe you could tell people about that journey, about learning on another program and having to switch over to the current program that you use. But very, very early on, we got talking and just tossing around ideas. So I've known you for quite a while. You're one of the first maybe 100 people who joined the Mobile Accessible Games group. So you've been in that group as a contributor for a very, very long time. I also think that's why you so resoundingly won the Mobile Accessible Games Game of the Year. Is because I think people felt like, hey, this is one of us, a fellow blind person who's been a community member for years in this group, seen your name out there, and I think they were really excited to vote for you and see you, get the Game of the Year at our group. So, I mean, do you remember where we over what subject we originally started conversing?
I know the general context, at least as I remember it now, probably 3 years later, was I think after I had lost my sight, I had started a blog just to make myself do work with JAWS and stuff like that. And I had tried doing something similar on WordPress to what you do in the Facebook group. And I stopped and got back into school and all that stuff. And I don't know if I'd seen you posting about the Facebook group or what, but I had commented something to the effect of hey man, it's really cool that you're doing this. I tried doing this in the past, and somehow we became friends. So
Yeah.
I don't know how, but yeah.
No, we didn't even do it over a meal or a beer, all remotely.
Messages, yeah.
So you have had quite the journey over the last few years of teaching yourself how to code. Again, you started after you lost your sight, so you're learning this experience completely blind with no prior experience. Why don't you tell people a little bit about that journey? Where you ran into some pitfalls, where you had to pivot. When was it difficult and you wanted to just give up, but you continued on. Tell people about that journey.
There's been a couple times where I've wanted to give up and just move on, but so initially when I started learning how to code, I had heard about a programming language / supposedly accessible game engine being developed by the University of Las Vegas, Nevada. And from my understanding, the game engine is accessible. The issue was actually with the developer tools. And I've kept in contact with that team over time, and it seems like they've added some more support for developers now. So it might actually be something that people can look into now. But It's an evidence-based programming language. So, these are doctors in computer science that only add features to the language that are based on peer-reviewed literature, and then even just the syntax of the language. They've removed all the symbols that you see in most programming languages. It's just like common English to write the code, which is really cool. So if people want to try that, you can look up the Quorum programming language. And then, so that was in October of 2021 when I started teaching myself. And I eventually got to the point where I knew enough to have some code that would run a small project, and I wanted to test it on my iPhone. And that's when I found out that their tools to put their apps onto an iPhone or any Apple device were inaccessible for developers. So I ended up switching and decided that the best way for me to make an impact and create something that really stands out accessibility wise and visually, because that's kind of been my whole intent this entire time, is my focus is accessibility, but in order to grow this company, it also has to be playable by people without disabilities. So I decided that native development, which means that I have to write as different code base for every platform that I publish to in a different language, is the best way because it gives you the most control over that stuff. And so I started with developing for Apple devices because that seems to be where a large portion of the visually impaired community is at.
When
So
when you had to make this switch from Quorum over to the Apple Swift program, did you have to like completely relearn and reteach yourself how to program? Is it like, you knew English and now you got to learn German and like, it's kind of completely different, or is there a lot of carryover? Learning
it's,
Spanish to French, which is a lot.
some of the concepts carry over. Plus, I mean, my skill in programming is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was when I switched now. So I'm doing more complicated stuff and especially like, handling networking stuff and stuff like that. So it's a little different scenario, but I pretty much had to totally restart. Um, so that was one of those points where I wanted to give up. Also, because when I switched over to developing for the Apple ecosystem, you have to develop on a Mac for that. And when I went to blind rehab, I was only taught how to use JAWS. So I used JAWS to teach myself voiceover by reading articles on the Apple Viz website, and then started tinkering around with Xcode to figure out how to use that. And then I started learning the language that I use now, which is Swift, and the various frameworks that I use inside of that language. But it is doable, and that app called Xcode that you write all of your code in is like 95% accessible. So you can do everything that you need to do, even though it's not always smooth. But that's what I've been carrying on with, and currently what I'm doing now with my next projects.
For those who might want to try to attempt to follow in your footsteps and use some accessible teaching tools to learn these programs, was it hacking with Swift? Was that the teaching tool set you used to kind of learn how to do various things? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's for the basic language stuff that I learned. There's a 100-day long course that's project based and teaches you stuff, and I've written all about like the tools that you need and stuff, and as well as a guide to using Xcode, because that so Xcode is an integrated development environment. That's like the common term for apps that you write code in, whatever the language is. It is a monster of an app, and so there's no documentation on how to do it blind. So I wrote a basic outline just so people can get started and do what they need to do to at least follow along with those tutorials. So I
And
can
where
send you
could
those.
somebody find that? Yeah, where could someone find that? If do you have that on a website somewhere or on your Dark Horse
Yeah,
website?
if you go to darkhorsegamestudios.com, in the navigation pane up top, there one of the links says articles, and if you go to that page, then you'll find the little two post guide that I've written between the tools and the how to use Xcode.
Now, when you started teaching yourself and you were like, all right, I have a little behind the scenes. I know you have a particular game envisioned in your mind. It's obviously a lot more complex and involved than Xanagrams is. But you started with Xanagrams as something that you figured was bite size that you could learn on. And I guess the question is, have you learned just about everything you need to know, or learned a lot to be able to kind of move on to that now more advanced project, or so I guess, like, how far are you into your coding knowledge? Are you still very much a beginner? Are you kind of middle of the road? Are you advanced? What would you say?
I feel like I'm probably middle of the road right now, especially I don't the stuff that I do on the visual side is relatively, I stick to the script a little bit. I don't do anything crazy because I can't test it. So,
Right.
but I've started 2 games and then just had a business opportunity come up to potentially or for the development of a more business focused app. And so I'm actually working on that right now. And that's involving, networking and setting up servers and communicating and storing data remotely. And that's been a big learning thing for me. But the hope there is that if that one gets out and takes off, then there is a solid stream of funding for game development and for me to bring on other developers and writers or composers and stuff like that with the games. That's my focus is definitely the games long term.
Have you thought about, now that you can say you're a two-time Game of the Year winner, well, at least 2 times. I don't know if there's been more, but two-time Game of the Year winner. Have you ever thought of doing, like, let me set up a Patreon, for creating accessible games, and have basically crowdsource with tiers. If I can raise this much money, I'll create this type of game with these features. If I can raise a higher amount, I can do something even more complex. Have you kind of thought about that, like a Kickstarter, crowdfunding, Patreon type of income model to go along with the downloads of the game?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking I'm going to do with these next 2 games that I'm working on is more of a Kickstarter model, but I'll do it when I have the games completed and at least ready for their initial release or pretty close to it, and then see if I can raise the money to have, fully described art made and immersive sounds and things like that. Because I've done a lot of research into that, and it seems like for the most part, when companies start putting out those Kickstarters, the projects are 80 or 90% done already. It's just a matter of being able to polish things in a way that'll really make the game stand out.
And so, I guess, where were you, or how did you find out, first, on AppleVis, you got their Golden Apple Award for game. Their kind of system is that they have a couple different programs. One of the categories is games, and every year someone gets voted as the top game. It's called the Golden Apple. So you won that on AppleVis. That came out in December. And then you won the Mobile Accessible Games Game of the Year. That came out on January 1st. And so, where were you when you found out? And, what were your immediate thoughts when you heard yet that you had won?
The Apple Viz one was funny. I was actually up in the mountains skiing. I live in Colorado, so I'm not super far from the mountains, and I get to ski somewhat often. But I was up on a ski trip with other blind veterans, and I actually found out from Justin, who is the lead developer of the Timecrest team, and he messaged me and was like, "Hey man, I saw that we tied. I just wanted to reach out and say congratulations." And so it was kind of wild because him and I had just started talking here in the last couple of months, just emails back and forth. So it was kind of neat that it ended up turning out that way. And especially because that game is so much bigger than Zanagrams and
Yeah.
has been covered by sources like the New York Times and stuff like that. I was pretty blown away to have I was content with the tie. Normally
Yeah.
I would be like, "Oh, I didn't win," but I'll take that one. That was pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, because that game has been around for 10 years or so. And what's interesting about the Golden Apple is you have to within the year, if it's a game that hasn't been released in that year, you have to have done major upgrades or changes to the app within the year to be considered. So they, even though that game's been out for 10 years, they're still putting loads of content and effort into that game 10 years on because it has such a robust following.
Yeah, and it's really cool. It's just him and his wife, and from my understanding, they're both sighted, and they just made have made this monster of an accessible game, which is really cool. But and then with the mobile accessible games, when I can't remember if you texted me or if I saw your Facebook post first, but I was at home and was actually coding, and that's was working on the next projects when I found out. And that one, because I had access to people's votes since it was in the Facebook post. Like thought it was coming. I obviously wasn't positive, but it was
Yeah, there's a
reading.
100% transparency because you could see everybody's votes.
Yeah, so that was really reassuring though. Like, okay, this wasn't a one-off thing. These are two separate communities, and it was. It's good to know that it's actually having an impact on people for people to want to take the time to vote for it and stuff like that. It's neat, and it gives me more confidence to move forward with this into these larger projects.
And who was the first person you told that you had won either one of those awards?
When I was on the ski trip, it was the people on my trip with me because we had just gotten there, I think, the day before. And I had told them that I was up for an award and had asked the other blind vets that were there to go vote for it. And I don't know if any of them did. If they didn't, they should feel bad because if one of them would have voted, then I
Yeah,
would
you
have
would have
won.
won.
Yeah, but and then here, I'm trying to think. I don't know who I told first. It was kind of, it felt a little surreal. I think I told my girlfriend because we were talking, but yeah, it was all of it's been really surprising just because Zanagrams did really well out of the gate, especially when it was new and it was getting hyped up, and things kind of fell off a little bit. I mean, it was still getting downloads and things like that, but just not nearly at the level that it was before. And then for it to have had that much support, 6 months after it came out, when it seemed like people weren't paying attention to it anymore, was huge. And again, yeah, it makes me. I think it gives me a lot of satisfaction again that devoting 2 years of my life to this has been for something that's been good for people.
Yeah, I mean it's just talking to developers about the life cycle of a game, and particularly if you take some game that's static, like it gets put out and there's nothing new that goes into it. You get like 3 months, and then it trickles down to next to nothing on downloads because it's just lost in the sea of games that are coming out, and it's out of people's mind's eye, and it's the new game that just came out. Um, the ones that seem to kind of keep going are the ones that are kind of episodic. Like, I mean, Timecrest has, Timecrest 1, 2, and 3. And,
Yep.
people, play one and they're left on a cliffhanger. And then, a year later comes out two. And then, we're talking about the game again. And then people start downloading game one, in order to play game two. And so it kind of, they kind of remind people that, hey, we are out here and we got, wonderful, great new stuff for you and new features. And again, in 2023, a whole revamp of the entire application. Um, so it gets hard on, I would imagine, on games like Zanagrams where you're adding new puzzle packs and things like that, but there's not a major whole new gameplay or something that you can promote, and so that forces you to get out there and market on your own and promote on your own, and hustle, hustle, hustle. It's just, we were talking about this offline. Not the favorite thing to do for anybody. You'd rather be Cody than doing that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Except for talking
Well,
to
and
me. You like talking.
yeah, I love talking to you, obviously. But so it's interesting, you hear it with authors or at least independent authors, and also with app developers. Like if you can just create a catalog, and especially you see some app developers talking about, putting out an app every couple months, which I don't think with games and doing it totally blind is possible. But, having that to where you're just building up a catalog at some point, then it seems like it, you know, rising tides kind of raise all ships.
Right.
So like those different audiences kind of support the other apps that they otherwise wouldn't have found. But and especially with these next games, they're a lot larger in scale. So it's just not feasible. It's going to be a while before they come out, but that's fine. I'll just keep plugging away.
Yeah, I can think of a few developers, and yeah, it's kind of like some a little bit faster, but I would say on average, like a game a year they're putting out and building up a catalog where they now have five, six, seven games. And I've done this. I've played one of their games and we're like, oh, that was pretty good. What? And go to the Apple, what else is by them? And I just download everything that they've done because I'm like, well, if they've done one good, I bet these other ones are pretty good too. So, that's your whole, the rising tides raise all boats sort of concept. You just got to hook somebody on one of the games to maybe get them into the other ones as well. So, you're obviously, I know you've been continuing to do some work on Zanagrams. I know you have some in your mind's eye, some more games. Where are we on the life cycle? Or are we just in maintenance mode of Zanagrams? Have you started this, new game concept that you've been thinking about? Like where are we in the various games, development life cycle right now?
Xanagrams wise, I'm responding basically to the level of input from the community. If downloads are going up, then I'm adding more content. And obviously, if people reach out, then I'll add more content. I am working on another puzzle pack right now, but I hadn't been for a while just because like people really weren't downloading it. It was getting 2 or 3 downloads a day. So now that it's back to a good level, I'm going to be producing content for it at a higher rate unless something changes. And then I have started working on 2 other games. It'll be a minute, especially I've had another opportunity to make a more utilitarian app that could potentially help support further endeavors and in the game development space. And so I'm stepping away from the game development stuff for the most part right now to work on that. I am still doing game development stuff in the background, but it's not my primary focus like it was. I'll work on it for like 2 days a week as opposed to 7.
I think I told you the story, but share it with the community. So I host a Christmas dinner at my house, and I had a bunch of family over, and I was telling them about you and about Xanagrams. So my mother-in-law, who's a big, plays all the word games, said, "Oh, you might like this. Download Xanagrams." So she downloaded Xanagrams, and as we were kind of prepping Christmas dinner, she was calling out the clues, and everybody was kind of taking guesses, and then she was spelling out the words, and you hear the little chime that she got it right. And it was just kind of fun that we were kind of like doing it as a group play, as we were just all kind of sitting around. It was actually kind of one of the special moments of the holiday season. It was actually around playing Xanagrams, at least for me, just knowing the history of it, knowing what it was going to mean for you, because by that point you were so far ahead in the voting. I knew you were going to win. And I think you had just won the Apple Viz Golden Apple. So like I was just really so happy for you, just having gotten to know you over the years, knowing you before you ever put out a game and you were just struggling to try to learn it. I was just that journey to see that you had taken and the success that you were having was just, it was just real special. And I'm just so happy for you.
Well, and it was neat because I think we had said happy or Merry Christmas to each other, and you said that your family was kind of sitting around playing it together, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's really cool. That was I don't know how to describe that. It felt good. Yeah, it felt really good, and so that was neat. And obviously, it's been cool because you've also like I've been a long member of mobile accessible games, but you've known me from before the start of this. So you've kind of been my biggest fan with
Yeah.
all of it and the biggest promoter of it. It's been really cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's because, there's a lot of people who will talk but not do. I mean, you were doing, and you were like, I'm going to do this, and it's a struggle. And I've talked to you when things were frustrating and things didn't work out, or you spend a lot of time working on something, and then you had to switch from quorum over to something else and restart, and but you didn't give up, and you just kept pushing through. And so, I was just personally really excited for you, and it was excited for you when the game came out, and really talked about it to the community and said, hey, you Zach's one of us. Let's go support him. Now we talked about this too. Like hopefully you've gotten a good amount of downloads. I would tell people you please go out and rate the game on the Apple Store. That really helps, because that helps it expand beyond just our community, because then Zach's game gets pulled into those you might also like, or the featured game of the day sort of thing. So the more you can uh, both by downloads and also by rating the game out on the App Store. I mean, it only takes like 2 seconds. You can just put 4 stars and don't even put a comment, or 5 stars, don't even put a comment, or you can write a little comment saying something nice. It doesn't really take that long, but it would mean so much to Zach to have people continue to see ratings, because again, it's just like it's a self uh, fulfilling prophecy, right? So like if you're, let's just say, Candy Crush, and it's got hundreds of thousands of, not a million ratings, then Candy Crush always shows up at the top of the list of everything, which means it gets downloaded more and then gets more ratings. So it's just a feeding frenzy if you can get into that loop. So let's help Zach get into that loop by being sure to give him as many ratings as possible out there on the App Store.
Yeah, that definitely helps a lot. And ultimately, in a perfect world, if whether it's Zanagrams or another app that I make, if things start to take off, I'm hoping I can make the general public more aware of digital accessibility issues and stop accepting inaccessible products from other developers. Obviously, some things are not possible to be accessible, like certain kinds of video games and stuff like that. They're just not set up in a way. But in places where things can be accessible, I think the reason that the public doesn't get pissed about things being inaccessible too is just because they don't know about it. And so if I can get a larger voice in this space and show people that it's really not that much extra work. It does take some extra work, but not a ton. And bring some attention to the fact that like they say in America, 70% of people with disabilities are unemployed. A lot of that is due to a lack of opportunity that restricted, at least in the visual impairment community, is restrictions or being restricted from information or opportunities because of inaccessible software or websites. And so I think it could have an impact on the industry as a whole, because again, it's not that hard and there's really no reason to not be doing it.
Yeah, I want you to get out there and do lots of interviews to be like, look, I'm a blind developer and I'm able to make things accessible, so you should be able to do it. And what it really is you just got to think about it at the outset, so that as you're building the game, you're just doing the accessibility as you go along, not get to the end and be like, oh, I got to do accessibility, and then go back and only get to half of the items or miss half of the stuff around adding the accessibility in. If you just start with the right building of the framework, then it's not a terribly big deal. It's a big deal when you've already completed the game and now you want to go put accessibility in. Now you're messing with code that you've already solidified and knows working. So best to just do it right from the outset. So that's I hope you get out there and preach that as a developer who's done it, to get other developers to do it. And it's actually one of the reasons I also do this interview series, is to get that awareness out there. And basically what every developer says is not a big deal as long as you just do it from the outset.
Yeah, it's like anything else. I mean, if you take shortcuts early on, you're going to pay for it later.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, Zach, I thank you so much for coming back out, chit chatting with me quickly to talk about your wins. Again, so happy for you. I see many more awards and accolades in your future because of the time and the dedication and the passion that you have in the space. That always leads to good things. So whenever you want to come back and talk to us some more, please do. You can reach Zach. He's in the mobile accessible games group, so you can always say hi to him there and comment on the things that he comments. You can go to his website, darkhorsegamestudios.com, and see him there. Information about his games, articles that he's written about developing as a blind developer. And you can also be sure to go out to the App Store, download Zanagrams. That's Zanagrams. It's on the App Store for Apple. And while you're out there, be sure to provide him a nice rating about the game to help him out. It's a fun game. I told you, good family fun for all to sit around and play it. Play it solo, play it with a group. It's quite fun, and a mind teaser both on figuring out the clues and then knowing the linguistics to spell the word correctly and get it in there. So it's a very excellent and fun word game to play. So I really suggest that everyone go out there and download and help Zach out. Any final words from you before we depart for today?
Just that you can also reach me by emailing me at contact@darkhorsegamestudios.com or on X at Zach C as in Charlie Tidwell.
And that's Tidwell.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Well, again, thank you. And, be sure to come back. We'd love to talk to you again.
All right. Thanks.